always like to look to put things in perspective and get the latest news about what Google is worth. And it tells you what a sort of global gorilla it is. In Q2 of 2024, the total revenues was $84.74 billion. That's $84.74 billion, which is absolutely huge. And it's anticipated to reach $273.37 billion in 2024. And just to put that in perspective, Google itself, as you probably remember, was founded in 1998 by Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were PhD students at Stanford University. And the company quickly grew and became the leading search engine and expanding into other digital services and products. Now, when you get that big and that enormous, obviously the lawyers all had their eyes on you. And in particular, the European Commission began investigating Google's dominance in search advertising in 2008. In 2010, there were various investigations and fines were imposed by the European Union, including about anti-competitive practices, about search abuse of its search dominance, and unfair practices, as I say, in advertising. In 2017, just to talk about the billions again, the EU fined Google $2.4 billion for manipulating search results in favor of its own shopping services. It's what I said beforehand about making things disappear, and I referenced Trump, and I think Basil might have some points on that in a bit as well. But to manipulate the results when people are relying on those search things, that was the complaint in that sort of side. 2020, the US Department of Justice had filed a landmark antitrust lawsuit against Google, accusing it of maintaining an illegal monopoly in search and digital advertising. And in 2021, the EU imposed additional fines and restrictions on Google, focusing on its Android operating system and online practices. And I think just to give sort of Basil an opportunity to respond, because I know he wanted to mention something about the Trump case, it's putting this into perspective. Is this global gorilla worth absolutely billions is controlling, if you like, how we get information. So if you tap in a search request and it promotes particular answers to you, it basically will give you the narrative, whatever narrative the person who pays the most for gets you to do. On a simple basis, say, give us the best plumber in the world. Well, whoever pays the most money is the best plumber.
Exactly. I'm a little bit skeptical if we are going to see any real change here, because as I mentioned, this is going to head into perhaps appeals phase. And even if Google were to be fined, for example, I doubt this company is going to be broken up, or at least elements of it is going to be broken up. I think it's just going to be perhaps fined, if it even is fined. And then where is that money going to go? Just back into the same corrupt US system. So I'm not too hopeful. What about you, Basil? How do you see this? How do you see an outcome with this?
Well, the great thing about Google from the early part of this century was that, it totally revolutionized search. I'm old enough to remember Alta Vista in the pre-Google days. And then Google came along and you just got much, much better results. It was as simple as that. It was totally neutral and, produced whatever information, whatever links you wanted. Now, it's changed quite dramatically over the last 10 years in so many ways. First of all, if you search for anything on Google now, the first 6, 8 items you will see are sponsored. They're paid for. Rather than just simply being search results, you have to scroll quite a long way down, and the search results are interspersed with adverts, paid adverts. And then, of course, about 7 or 8 years ago, they started scrubbing independent media like today's News Talk from their search results, whereby, basically corporate establishment media was privileged. And if you put a news item into Google and clicked news, you would only get the establishment media results. Lots of independent media suffered huge drops in traffic as a result of that. That's remained the case ever since. But this case focuses on the conditions of the contract that Google had with Apple, whereby they paid Apple about $26 billion in order for the Safari search on all Apple operating systems to default automatically to Google. And this is a sort of monopoly practice, which is what provoked the whole case in the first points. First of all, everybody's always talking about how Google and the United States authorities basically work hand in glove against people. Well, this is an interesting case where actually the Department of Justice have taken it upon themselves to sue Google, to take them to court. So it's very much a sort of intra-elite battle that's going on here, and huge amounts of money generated for lawyers. And the Department of Justice claim, at least, to be acting on behalf of consumers. The second point is, well, what was the result of this? So what if Google paid Apple billions? Well, the result is that Google has been increasing its prices to advertisers. I have a friend who runs a small business here in Somerset, and he says it's very difficult now to get any value out of paying for your Google AdWords or your Google sponsored content, because they charge so much that it's, dubious whether you can generate the sales as a result. More and more businesses migrating to Amazon and various other platforms. So basically, Google bought up all the shelf space on browsers with default search engines, Mozilla, Apple, and all the rest of it, to the exclusion of everybody else. And the key point about that is that other search engines were unable to get the traffic to begin to compete with Google. In order to improve your results, you need the traffic. And if Google is monopolizing the traffic, then you can't improve your search engine because not enough people are using it. So that's why they've had to go at them. You're right, Taylor. It'll take years to unpick this. Obviously, Google are going to appeal, billions of dollars at stake. The remedy phase would be changes to the terms of these contracts to allow other companies to insert their search engines. Final point, the irony, of course, is that most people choose Google anyway for their searches. So why they felt the need to, effectively bribe all these other companies with tens of billions of dollars to keep everybody out of the market, I don't know, but they must have worked out it was money well spent.
Right. And in Europe, we have some remedy to this. This was established through the Digital Markets Act, and I'm not here to promote the Digital Markets Act or the Digital Services Act, of course, but what it does is if you open up your device and you go to your browser, you do have an option to select what you would like your preferred search engine to be. So that's how Europe has been able to circumvent perhaps this illegal monopoly, perhaps. Andrew, do you find that as a potential way for the United States to handle this particular issue? And also, do you find it somewhat odd or unusual that the US DOJ did not seek any penalties?
Well, it is interesting because they normally work on percentages. And when you have that amount of turnover, which I referenced at the very beginning, they are absolutely huge. But the very business is predicated on, if you pay me money, I will push you up the search engine. And as Basil mentioned, we talked about his local shop owner, who you should actually mention, Basil, because here on TNT, we can plug them. Who were they?
A company called Indigo Herbs of Glastonbury.
Oh, wonderful. What sort of herbs do they sell? Are they illegal?
Well, they sell superfoods,
brilliant.
Wheatgrass, supplements, healing herbs, all that sort of thing.
I love it. They will be delighted, salivating at the thought you promoting them on TNT, and we'll get our advertising folk to give them a buzz. They can do even better and get more advertising. But it's exactly that. That's the business model, is that basically people are paying to be found. And as soon as you've got that business model, it means that you're not going to have an independent search result. So it's going to be that balance. But people spend a lot of money. It's a huge, huge business. As I say, I gave you the figures at the beginning of this piece, the latest reported figures. Again, always question everything, because what does that mean in practice? But the reality is that it's a huge business. And as it's a huge business, they want to do everything they possibly can within the law to do that. But it also raises the point, sometimes people will turn around and say, well, okay, if the fine is not particularly big or there's no fine at all, then effectively it becomes like a license fee. You can turn around and say, well, we can carry on this practice because we're generating billions. And if we don't have to pay very much money, we would effectively treat that as a license.
Right. That is a really good way to outline it. It's like a license fee. Very interesting. But you're exactly right. If you are not paying for a service online, it's because they are taking something from you. That is your data. This is quite an effective business model, or cost-effective business model, because it doesn't require any inventory. All they do is just take your data. Of course, it is highly unethical, but this is being adopted by various other companies, of course, not just Google, and it's also used on a global scale. Basil,
Yeah,
any other insights or go ahead, Andrew, follow up for me.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and it's always worth reminding everybody, absolutely everybody, that if you don't pay for a service, then you are the service. And what happens is data, as I always say, is the new currency. So every time you tick those terms and conditions entitling a third party to use all your information, work out what they're doing with it, that's what you're doing. You're paying with attention, and the advertising revenues, the billions and billions that are generated as a result of it, the way that you can generate that billions is by sharing that data. Make sure you don't give permission unless you know exactly what you're doing.
Oh, that whole allow cookies business, hasn't that become tiresome? But I suppose it's for our benefit. Google, of course, is facing new competition from artificial intelligence search engines. So they're partnering themselves with a UK-based startup called Anthropic, and that has brought them into the crosshairs of the UK's antitrust watchdog, which has said earlier this week it's examining whether that partnership represents a merger scenario that negatively affects competition. But that's what they're worried about, that the search could be revolutionized yet again by AI.
And I think it's exactly that. It not only could be, it is being revolutionized. And what's happening is it's generating more and more. Going back to the idea of questioning everything, I always say that artificial intelligence is perhaps our greatest human achievement, but potentially the biggest existential threat. If you thought we're drowning in a sea of misinformation and disinformation, the combination of AI and fake news is going to make it absolutely horrendous. And in 2017, fake news was the word, although it's two words, of the year with Collins Dictionary. In last year, 2023, AI was the word of the year. You put the two together and you have a delicious cocktail of misinformation. So we have to be incredibly careful, and we have to be aware that when we get all these AI generated search engines and the results that they're going to pump out, which will be lots of videos, it'd be greatly enriched media, we still have to question everything. Go back to genuine sort of values about, does this make sense? What are the sources for this information? Could there potentially be somebody else in the same way as we looked at the very beginning with the different names? What are we looking at here? Because you can guarantee, you can basically get any story supporting any case, any evidence you want, even if that's made up. And I'll give you one final example. There was a wonderful case about hallucinations, and ChatGPT, when it first started, rather like politicians, if it didn't know the answers to something, it would make it up. And there was a wonderful case of a lawyer who was taken, a negligence case. He was representing somebody who was hit, I think, in the leg by one of these trolleys they have on an airline, and he went before the judge and he quoted three cases, X versus such and such an airline, and the judge sort of nodded and said, well, Mr. Smith, all very interesting, but none of those cases are true. And the lawyer basically worked out it was this hallucination. ChatGPT had made the whole thing up. And that's what we've got to be very, very careful of.